So it wasn't so long ago that it was announced that Zeus would become the coach of Liquid CSGO, and of course he has already been with them a brief amount of time. He coached them just very briefly at Northern Arena Montreal. He didn't come in until late when they were playing, against, I think, against G2 in that series, but they wound up losing pretty close 1-2 series. And of course he was with them at IEM Oakland, but he hasn't really had a whole lot of time to actually do any preparation with them or do any real coaching outside of maybe just trying to help them a little bit during a live setting, but of course no real practice with him just yet. But the whole point of this video is to talk about how this coaching position with Liquid, or whatever coaching he may do in the future after Liquid if things don't work out here, is really going to be one of the biggest pieces that define the legacy that Zeus leaves behind in CSGO. And the reason why I say this is because, yes, Zeus had a lot of success with SK Gaming, and, you know, back when they were named Luminosity before that. There's no doubt about it. You know, he was the coach of a very successful team, and I'm sure he contributed in a lot of ways to that team. But there always is the question out there, how much of it was Zeus as opposed to how much of it was Fallen? You have to remember that he was next to one of the greatest in-game leaders in CSGO throughout his entire tenure on that team. Right? Whereas now, while he's coaching Liquid, where there is no, you know, solidified leader on the team, obviously this team has been through several shuffles with who is the in-game leader, there is no clear leadership role on that team. And so I think now, whatever Zeus does with Liquid, there will be no question who is the contributor to how they rise or how they fall or how their strategy changes over time. And that will be the same with probably many teams that he may coach in the future if things don't work out with Liquid, unless he's coaching alongside some other type of establishing game leader. So I feel like this is where he really shows his grit as a coach, is with this team and, like I said, perhaps future projects. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this in detail because in no way am I discrediting what Zeus did with Luminosity and SK Gaming. Like I said, I have no doubt that he certainly contributed to that team in a positive way. But he wasn't the captain of that ship, whereas he would be the captain of a team like Liquid, like I said, that doesn't really have any known guide of leadership history, so to speak. I'm trying to like say this exactly the way I want to, but it's really difficult. But hopefully throughout the video, you'll kind of pick up on what I mean. So let's talk a little bit about Zeus. You know, how does he get to the point he is now? And obviously the first time that I knew of Zeus, because I didn't really study the Brazilian scene too much, except with the exception of Kaboom and what they became. The first time I ran across Zeus was with the Games Academy team, which is obviously the team that won the Golden Chance opportunity in Brazil. This is like around, I think, the August 2015 time period is when they had officially won it, and they were going to be moving to North America as part of Fallen's like Golden Chance to get another Brazilian team into the NA scene to try to see what they could do. And like I said, this was towards the end of 2015. And they were Games Academy, and they come over, and they are playing in ESEA main. They do pretty well there, so they're working their way up into the Premier Division of ESEA. They also eventually qualified for this RGN Pro Series lane event, where they played a couple of close series against Luminosity, their Brazilian brethren, as well as Cloud9, but they lost both those games and fell out in playoffs. And so this team was kind of working their way up the semi-pro scene of North America and looked like they were growing. But then a roster move happens, right? And this happens in November of 2015, where Taco and FNX of the Games Academy team actually move over to Luminosity to replace Bolts and Steel. And then Bolts comes down to Games Academy, and they also pick up Phelps. And of course, this team becomes Tempo Storm and what we know as Immortals today, though a couple of more roster transactions taking place over that time period. And so Zeus joins up alongside this Luminosity team with Taco and FNX, of course, alongside Fallen Fur and Cold Zera. And before this move had happened, LG needed change, it seemed, because they had kind of hit this ceiling. You know, they had for some time been able to maintain legendary status in majors. Most recently, before this change, it was at Cluj, where they had beat Cloud9 and Fnatic in the group stages, but lost a close 0-2 series to Navi. This was in October of 2015. And then they also had a couple of top 4 finishes, like they placed top 4 at the iBuyPower Cup 2015 that happened at the end of the year. They lost to Cloud9 in the semifinals. This was, again, around the early November time period, right before they actually made the change. And then they make this change, and the first LAN that they play together is this Face It Stage 3 finals at DreamHack Winter. And this is like just a few days after they made the announcement, like the last week, basically, of November, I believe, or the third week of November. And they actually take second at this event. Remember, this was was really surprising because they had just put this team together. And remember, they opened the event with this 0-16 loss to Fnatic on Dust 2, and this is where that becomes kind of their permaban going forward. But they wound up climbing through the rest of it. They beat Envy, they beat Nip, they beat what is now Astralis, or many of the players that are now on Astralis, and then they lose to Fnatic in the finals in a pretty decent 1-2 series. And this is how they're kind of ending 2015. As well as starting this rivalry with Navi, which kind of begins at the EPL Season 2 finals in December of 2015. And then they come to 2016 with Zeus, and I'm not going to get into the entire history of Luminosity and SK. This is well documented. I've done videos on it, I've written articles about it. Many have. But the point is that Zeus coaches this Luminosity and then eventually SK team basically through most of 2016. It wasn't until, I believe, July, right after Cologne, that Zeus announced he'd be leaving the team and he would be pursuing a career as a player, which of course would be with Immortals. And so basically through this time of 2016, they played about 10 international tournaments with Zeus as a coach, right? They placed top 4 in all but 2 of these 10 events. And this is after DreamHack winner. Right now, of the 2 that they didn't place top 4, one was because they got disqualified from E-League Season 1, and then the other was, of course, the DreamHack Masters Malmö tournament, where they got upset by Tyloo. Now, in these 10 international lands, they also made 6 finals appearances, and this includes 3 titles that they won, and 2 of these, of course, were majors, MLG Columbus and ESO1 Cologne. So, again, a lot of success that this Brazilian team had when they made that move to pick up Zeus as a coach and to bring in FNX and Taco. Now, the thing is how much of this success then can be tied to Zeus as the coach becomes the question. Because, again, he's alongside a legendary in-game leader in Fallen, who had been piecing this team together for quite some time, ever since X Games Aspen with Kaboom in January of 2015, all the way up until the point that they really hit this hot streak through the end of 2015 up until, I guess, July of this year. He had been piecing players together. He had been creating a new system. It started out as being this execute-oriented team that was just like a specialist on Mirage. Had all these crazy executes that they developed, like the 5 smoke setups on the A-bomb site, where this new innovation on how that site was executed, to then building the system similar to Navi, where you have like this really slow, methodical style default setup. And then you kind of build off of that as your foundation into different like mid-round calls and executes. And then, of course, it was about getting the right players to play the right roles and building the system, getting everyone on the same page, knowing how to play the system. And then eventually it loosens up a bit to where you give a little bit more individual freedom to some of your players in the default to make plays, but then know that, hey, when I tug on the leash and it's time to do this attack, it's time to gather up and do this attack. And then, of course, it just incorporated eventually speeding things up and adding more aggressive execute. So you can kind of see how the meta of this team developed over time. And this was really the brainchild of a leadership dichotomy of Zeus and Fallen, who kind of built the system up together and kind of taught the players how to play within the system over time, and brought in, like I said, new innovations to the team. But then again, like I said, it all comes down to how much do you credit that to Zeus, how much do you credit that to Fallen, how much do you credit the success to this dichotomy, because there's a lot of other factors in play that made this team great, right? Shaping up their map pool was big, you know, FNX coming in as a great role player and specialty clutcher was big, so like seemed like the roster move really brought something to the team. Obviously, Coldzera keeps solidifying himself as a star player, and then Fallen's op game really increased as well, it seemed like, after this roster transaction. Becomes one of the best oppers in the world throughout this time period. So a lot of things came into play to make this team successful, but a lot of it was the system that was built. But again, who do you credit it to? There's 2 examples that come to mind where you kind of get an idea of how both these people contributed to the tactics, right? So one would be this Cobble execute that Fallen came up with earlier in 2016, and it's based off of a smoke wall that Virtus Pro did. I'm going to put this actually up on screen so I can just give you an idea of how these 2 contributed together as a leadership dichotomy. So what you see on your screen is a smoke wall that I actually saw Virtus Pro do. This is actually from an online game in Civo, and this was, like I said, very early 2016, maybe at the very end of 2015, actually. And you can see what the smoke wall is. It's lined up around this SWAT van or APC that you see. And the way Virtus Pro actually used it was to actually push into the A-bomb site. And you can see that these smokes can be effective because most people would just smoke doors and balcony. But this smoke wall while it allows people to kind of get out of the door and get out of balcony behind the smokes, it also does a good job of blocking off any type of mid-slope flank from being able to get vision onto the A-bomb site as you're attacking as well. But what Fallen wound up doing with the smoke walls, he kind of tweaked it a bit, and he actually used it to split the B-bomb site through that doorway. So he would block vision on people playing inside the A-bomb site or playing long A, and he would actually push into connector with some players, as well as use some pressure at drop-down rim and long B to actually put the B-bomb site. Now, this was entirely the product of Fallen's thought process. I've even spoken to Zeus about this particular tactic, and he says, yeah, that was all Fallen. Fallen came up with this. But then there is another thing that Zeus came up with entirely on his own. And this was actually the decoy grenade that gets thrown at Squeaky Door on Cash before this map became a permaban for SK, which of course it did for quite throughout most of this year, though just recently at IM Oakland we saw them favoring banning Nuke and leaving Cash into the pool. But before that whole process of Cash being a big ban for the team, they used to run this thing where they would throw a decoy at Squeaky Door from outside the B-bomb site, and it would allow them to open Squeaky Door a different direction, which meant Fallen's op inside Squeaky Hall could actually get vision onto the A-bomb site. He would actually catch a couple of gimmicky picks this way. Now, this decoy grenade and this idea of opening the door the reverse way was entirely the product of Zeus from talking with him about this process. Now, on top of that, Zeus was also very involved in watching demos to study opponents, to get an idea how they played, and kind of, like I said, have discussions with Fallen about this. But again, the only way I was able to realize this information was actually talking from Zeus directly. There's so much more that would probably have to be explored by interviewing Zeus or interviewing Fallen, getting an idea on who actually did what. But the point is there's no doubt that Zeus contributed, right? That certainly he will still be remembered for his time on this team. The only point that I'm trying to make going forward is that now there is no established, brilliant in-game leader next to Zeus in which to build a system with. I'm sure the players on Liquid can contribute. There's some smart guys on that team that have ideas to bring to the table, I am sure. But it really will be Zeus who's kind of the captain of the ship, rather than a situation where you have some type of dual leadership system that took place on SKLG. And so in that case, there will be no question who to give credit to, I guess, is the main point that I'm trying to drive home here about Zeus. And it's also a story about redemption for Zeus, because remember, he decided to part ways with this SKLG team earlier this year to take up a role as an in-game leader for Immortals. And this was announced very quickly after Cologne, where SK had won their second major. And, of course, Immortals had just come off of winning the DreamHack Zowie Open Summer in June. They also had won a title at CEVO in April, and they were doing really well within the North American scene in some online tournaments and online qualifiers and such like that. So they're looking like a really strong team already, mostly when they were Tempo Storm under the leadership of Peacemaker, who had kind of put a similar system in place as far as like being able to have this foundation of the slow methodical default with very established peripheral roles being used, like Showtime and Bolts playing the perimeter, with guys like Lucas and Henny and company really being kind of like the force that would, and Phelps would, to get map control and open up areas of the map. But then he also kind of developed some cool, like, unique executes, particularly on Cash on the B-bomb site, and even some things he did with A were kind of cool. Really like hardened, like Cobblestone as being like a really big piece of the team. So a lot of the system that this Tempo Storm Immortals team used to be successful was kind of remnants of the system that Peacemaker had left behind, despite the fact that Bolts had to take over in-game leadership for a while after Peacemaker left the team, which was shortly after that title they won at CEVO in April. So the point is they kind of carried that on, but they were losing a little bit, right? Because Bolts, for example's performance had really tanked after he took over in-game leadership responsibilities. And so Zeus was meant to come on to replace like Showtime, who was kind of a weaker fragger on the team a lot of the time, but to add some leadership, add some structure to the team, take some weight off of Bolts' shoulders, free him up to be more effective as a fragger. And as he comes on the team, that does happen. Bolts' performance does go up. There's no doubt about it. But it seemed like they had kind of lost a root to that foundation that they were so used to playing that was so successful, as Zeus was trying to bring in new things, as he was trying to bring in like new kind of gimmicky things. Because one of the things that Zeus likes to do from talking with him is not only study opponents, which I've seen firsthand when he was coaching Liquid at Montreal. He was telling JDM, like, okay, this is where you can look out for this guy with your op. There's a good chance he'll do this. So he definitely studies his opponents and picks up on trends and tendencies he can pass to the people he is coaching or leading or what have you. If we're talking to Zeus, one of the things he likes to do is find some gimmicks, like find some cool one-way smokes or find some cool flash timings or something like that you could use to exploit someone. So he's trying to bring this into Immortals. Now, I don't know if it just didn't click with those guys, if they just weren't responsive to it, if they just didn't really... It's because maybe Zeus, who was performing poorly individually as a fragger, maybe for some reason that caused him to lose some respect for Zeus, or maybe maybe we don't need to listen to this guy because he's not playing very well. I'm not sure what happened there, but this team does sort of go into disarray. I don't think Immortals has ever looked as sharp tactically as they did when Peacemaker was coaching the team, to be honest. And this isn't necessarily the fault of Zeus. Like I said, maybe they just didn't take to him. Maybe there was just, some type of... They didn't mesh well together. I'm not really sure what the case was, but you could certainly see that strategically they weren't necessarily as strong. And granted, some player performances were maybe holding them back. Maybe you can try to run a strat, but if you're getting a player picked early or a player's not fragging very well, then the strat can't really work anyway. So I'm sure there's a mixture of all this, but the point is that things didn't necessarily work out on Immortals for Zeus. And it's not to say that Immortals did really bad while Zeus was on the team. No, not at all. I mean, they won the Northern Arena Toronto event, which is the first land that they played together. With Zeus as the in-game leader. They were playing really well online. They won that iBuyPower Fall tournament in September against Optic. They had qualified for E-League. They had a great record in Season 4 of EPL. They were second place after their regular season. I think they were 20-6. So it's not as if everything was bad. It's just that towards the end of Zeus's time with Immortals, they obviously crashed and burned at E-League Season 2 in the group stages there. They obviously didn't do well at the Season 4 finals in Brazil as being one of the home teams. The things didn't go really well there, and it was shortly after that Zeus leaves the team on not such good terms, it seems. I'm not sure if he was cut, he left, whatever. Seemed like he put out this statement on Twitter where he kind of cited maybe the immaturity of some of these guys, so he didn't even talk to some of these guys before he left the team. And so certainly seemed like they didn't leave on the best of terms. Maybe they've patched things up now, but in the immediate aftermath of everything, it didn't seem like it went over so well. And now, like I said, now he has his chance on Liquid, which is a team that has struggled, right? They had this top 4 finish at New York with the current 5, but then they had a rough ride at EPL Season 4 finals. Then they went out in groups in Montreal, which again, Zeus is only coaching them for one best of 3 that entire tournament, which was the one that eliminated them. So obviously really no time with them at all, other than maybe giving them some ideas about how G2 played certain maps, give them some ideas about the tendencies of the team. So like a little bit of a scouting report he could give to some of the guys. And he did have free reign to talk whenever he wanted. So maybe he could kind of pitch in ideas mid-round, or maybe if he sees somebody not communicating, he can step in and do that. So he definitely had some influence there, but he had no real time with the team. So I don't even think you can count this result as being a product of Zeus's leadership. Same with IAM Oakland, because they literally left Montreal and went straight to Oakland basically for this tournament. Again, basically no time to coach his team. Maybe he had a few hours with them each day before like ECS regular season matches to go over a little bit of something, but still not a whole lot of time. So now, from this point forward, after IM Oakland, until probably the major that Liquid plays in January, so I'm not sure what they'll be involved in. Maybe there's a chance they qualify for the ECS finals that take place in December, just a few weeks from now, in fact. So maybe they can be involved in that. I'm not 100% sure where they're at in the standings off the top of my head, but it seems like the next focus would, in fact, be the E-League major, right? As well as maybe some online play. And so this, again, is where Zeus can really kind of solidify his legacy. It's going to be on the back half of his coaching career where there will be no question who is responsible for being kind of the captain of the team, being like the lead guy as far as the team strategy and the structure that's in place and how they approach the game. How they prepare. This really will be like Zeus as the it'll be almost his total brainchild. I'm sure he'll get some ideas from Liquid players. It's not like they're all just mutes that have no contribution at all, but he has a lot of tasks on his hands. How do you figure out a way to better implement JDM and make him more effective? How do you just get this team running better tactically? Because they lost a lot of their tactical diversity when Peacemaker left. For example, when I was watching this Liquid team play Train against Navi in New York, they had all these crazy elaborate like fakes and double fakes and just cool executes on the Train. They lost that map, but they looked so good on it tactically, whereas it seems like they've lost some of that in future games I've seen. So he needs to bring some of that tactical diversity back to the team. He needs to help them solidify their defaults, because that team had a functioning default. They knew what spots they wanted to play, but it seemed like in mid-round situations they would kind of get hesitant and kind of stumble and kind of not really know exactly what they wanted to do, or maybe once they met some key resistance they weren't able to overcome it, and so it seemed like they struggled in some like mid-round late round situations from their default. And like I said, they lost a little bit of having a deeper playbook. So Zeus can fix all these things, maybe find a way to better implement JDM, make him more effective. He hasn't been super powerful since MLG Columbus time period, it seems. So how do you incorporate him? How do you facilitate all this talent? There's a lot of firepower on this team. If you can facilitate it properly, this could be a strong team. They've already shown hints of that at New York and such. So yeah, like Zeus does have a lot on his hands now with this team. And like I said, this could be where he really defines how good of a coach he really is. If he can take a team where he doesn't really have another established leader alongside him, and this team has a lot of firepower, can he like craft this team into something, I guess is really the point. Whereas on SK, he was always next to another great leader in Fallen who he could rely on for support, and they could work together to build something. Now it is going to be mostly him. And so I've maybe been a little bit redundant with this. Again, I don't want people to think that I'm taking away credit from Zeus's time in SK or LG, because I'm not. I know that he had contributions to that team in a positive way. I know he helped Fallen out. I know he came up with things. I know he studied opponents for them. I know he facilitated a lot of things on that team, but there was also Fallen there, right, who was also a great tactician and leader in his own right. And so now Zeus is kind of off on his own, trying to build his own legacy, a solo like story of his time in CSGO, so to speak. And it'll be interesting to see how the story unfolds. And so that's going to be it. If you enjoyed, please follow and subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.